Ash.
Evening, mate. You all right?
I'm not so bad. We've had a lot of fun with this story this week, I think. But before we get there, I'd like to say thank you to the new subscriber that we had this week.
Definitely. Yeah, I've even got a dog barking in the background thanking the subscriber.
Well,
which idiot dog? Oh, it's the girl dog, isn't it? Yeah.
And we have exciting news coming up as well.
Very exciting news, yes.
And due to the fact that nobody has entered the competition, I'm assuming that most people don't actually get all the way to the end of these things.
I'm wondering if people actually listen to what we're doing, just as sort of like a way of going to sleep. And we sort of like, it's just sort of like, I'm listening to these two prattling on. And
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that. Sometimes that might be the only way that I'll get into anyone's bed nowadays.
I know exactly what you mean, and I'm absolutely fine with the fact that I'm putting people to sleep on YouTube as well as in the classroom whilst I'm teaching, yeah.
And in your writing as well.
Yeah. You froze.
Yeah, I froze there for a second.
Say that again, sorry, you froze.
It's sunspots, Brexit, and Boris Johnson's fault.
Yes, and and I think we need to get rid of at least one of those.
At least just one of them.
Just one, yeah. Please hit the like button, subscribe, recommend us to friends, recommend us to people that you don't like. That'll show the fuckers, won't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and come and join the really famous set, because I'm going to announce this now. I'm going to announce what it fully is next week, before I do the synopsis and go into what we were reading this week. But next week, I believe he is the most decorated British writer of all time. He's won more awards than anyone else. He's got 3 Bram Stoker awards, right? Yeah, man's a god in the world of horror fiction, in particular horror short stories. It's the one and only Ramsey Campbell. And he's watched one of our podcasts and he liked it. And he's going to be on the show next week.
Yep.
Yeah. He's
Ramsey Campbell, he sits on my bookshelf between Ital Calvino and who the fuck was it after him? And Truman Capote. Not bad going. Yeah.
It's very, very, very exciting stuff. And I'm not going to tell you what he's picked because he's chosen the story. This is how we're doing it with special guests. When we get a special guest on, they pick the story. We will announce that at the end, as we always do. But I just wanted to tell people right at the start, we've got Ramsey Campbell coming on the show.
Yep, I am just so excited. When it comes down to, I mean, they say you shouldn't meet your heroes. Perhaps I shouldn't turn up next week. But yeah, I'm so looking forward to it. He's,
Well, it'll certainly sort out the Zoom. It will sort out the Zoom problem, won't it? Because we're going to have to pay for Zoom next week to get a third one in the room. So, so anyone who hit like and subscribe so we can get up to monetizing, that'll help pay for these Zoom calls.
Oh, yeah, that would certainly help. Yeah.
Just kidding. Honestly, we would just do this for the fun of it. We really would.
I'm right. Yes. Yes. So like, subscribe, recommend, and all the rest of it. And this time next week, Ramsey Campbell.
Oh, so looking forward to it. Right. It was my pick.
So it was your pick, yes. So Colin, you picked The Body Snatcher by Robert Louis Stevenson because clearly you've got a thing for Robert Louis Stevenson. You know, first of all, it's let's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde the crap out of this, and now we're body snatching out of this.
Yes.
Yes. What was the plot of The Body Snatcher? May I ask?
The synopsis.
What the fuck was the plot?
This is my. Remember, this is my synopsis. This isn't the wonderfully detailed ones that you get out of Ash. This is my version of the synopsis. But basically, it's a couple of geezers having a drink in a bar, and they get word that the notorious Wolf McFarlane, surgeon, is coming down to the bar to hold a surgery by all accounts. Anyway, one of the people who's having a drink recognizes the name and takes exception and gets up and has a right go at this doctor, and then sits down with his mates and actually explains why he had such a bad vibe towards this notable surgeon. And basically, they were medical students together, him and McFarlane. And they were medical students in London, where they were, no, Edinburgh, sorry, where they were, part of their duties was to take the bodies and pay the body snatchers for the bodies, for the fresh bodies. And one night, a body turns up that he recognizes. And it's a woman that he'd spoken to only the night before, and instantly knows that this is murder. And he speaks to his buddy, McFarlane, and says, this is murder. And McFarlane says, they all are, but we're not going to tell anyone, and talks him out of telling him out of it. Anyway, so later on, they get talking to this other geezer in a bar, McFarlane and his mate, and this guy called Gray is a bit rude to McFarlane. The next night, this guy called Gray turns up on a slab, ready to be dissected. And that's when he talks him into it again and says, look, we're into this for one, we've got to be into this for two. There's no point spoiling our careers, our fledgling careers and our reputations over all of this. So they dissect the body up so there's no evidence left. And then they run out of bodies and they get sent up to a graveyard to exhume the body of a woman. And during the removal of the body, the light goes out. And they get the body onto the back of the cart. As they're riding along, they notice the body and they think that's not a woman. And they lift back the cover to reveal that all along the body was Gray, the body they thought they'd got rid of, instantly knowing that there's no way that they could ever escape this grisly past. Was that the one you read?
Yours was a damn sight more exciting, in fairness. Yeah, I think it was the intonation that you put into sort of like that interpretation of it. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that one I would have happily listened to again and again. Yeah, the one I listened to didn't quite have the highs and lows. Yeah, it's my turn, isn't it? Right. Yeah.
Well, so Ash, what did you think? I think you've got some of that.
Right. What did I think to it? There's some really good parts to it, but also it's a Robert Louis Stevenson story. So it's starting off with four blokes in a pub, and this is what we've got with Treasure Island, and this is what we get with so many of his stuff, which suggests to me that he was probably a bit of a piss tag. But he came from Scotland, so this is what we expect.
Yes.
So we've got the piss tag part. He's got the word crapulous in the first page. And any writer who can put crapulous in its proper context in there wins bonus points from me, because it's not a word that we see used unless people are sort of like saying it for comic effect. But it's, yeah. So we've got crapulous working its magic there. But the thing I didn't like about the story was there was no logic within the content of it.
Okay.
And I know it sounds like I'm being a pick. I know, obviously, sort of like body snatchers, things coming back from the grave. But we weren't told why. We weren't given any reason to expect that. This whole thing about Gray being a little bit. I mean, first of all, we weren't Wolf McFarlane. First of all, the surname McFarlane. Why does it always have to be preceded by the name of an animal? Sort of like Ant McFarlane, Wolf McFarlane. I can see sort of like a theme here going on. But we've got. Why was Wolf McFarlane being called Toddy McFarlane? Why is that an insult? That wasn't explained to me, and it was just fucking irritating. And then when Gray comes back inside the sheet that was covering the farmer's wife that they've exhumed, why? Why was he there? How was he? Yeah, there was no explanation. And why did the story just end there? Seems as this was sort of like the framed narrative with the narrator who's watched these events occurred and then says, and I'm the one who's worked out what's actually happened, and then tells us what worked out, to this comic ending where they go sort of like, there's a spooky ghost there, and run away. It's got a couple of strong beginnings. It got an okay middle, but there was no conclusion. That's what I came away from it with.
No, that's good. I mean, like I say, I haven't read this one before, and it's one that I've always wanted to read because it always turns up on the lists.
Yeah.
Right? I think I know why it turns up on the lists, and we'll get into that when we start talking about the creativity of it. Did I enjoy it? I'm a bit like you, but not as angry. I think, in that I actually thought it was brilliant until the end. I thought the way it's set up, I liked the whole, because it seems to be a common theme with this Victorian style ghost storytelling, to be told in flashback, to be told as a raconteur event. We've read a number of them now, and they all seem to do this a lot.
Yeah.
And the Mezzotint did it. The Door in the Wall did it. You know, it all seems to like flow. The Old Nurse's Story was another one. And I like the fact that there was this, oh, look, something's happened between these two and we don't know what it is. I don't necessarily need everything laying out. I don't necessarily need everything explaining fully. I quite like the idea that he had a nickname that annoyed him and we don't know why. I quite like that, actually. Yeah. It's one of those kind of interesting, for me, it's like it allures to a bigger world that we don't have Lord of the Rings size books to explain why he's called Toddy. Just leave it there, leave it hanging. And it's like hanging, it's almost like you're eavesdropping rather than being part of the joke. And I quite like that.
Again, that does make perfect sense.
Yeah. And I quite like and I love the way he describes everything. And it is that dark and dingy and dirty. And like we were saying about Charles Dickens, in that the descriptions that are going on around everything, I thought were great. And I was really enjoying it. And then they get to this bit, and like I said, they open the coffin and they make sure it's a woman inside. And I even liked it when it was like how the light went out. They were digging the body up. He threw a stone over his shoulder and it broke. And at that point, I'm thinking, oh, something really bad's going to happen. Like, oh, is the oil from the lamp going to burn them in the grave and one's had to get out?
Yeah.
Or, you know, something like that. And then it just didn't. And then they're on, and it's when you suddenly realize, oh, it's not the same body. You're thinking, oh my God, this is now going to be someone they know. This is someone the doctor is going to go, I have got you by the balls. This is what happens if you tell on me. And then when it was grey, it was like, oh. It was just at that moment when they did the reveal, it was a bit, oh. But, oh.
Yeah.
So how did he get that in the grave then? Where's he been storing that? And it's sort of, that is when it suddenly had too many questions and it was too convoluted into how that plot could possibly approach. Like I say, changing the body in the coffin, I quite liked the idea of that, you know, and it should have been maybe one of the people they paid, you know, that was starting to kind of, you know, wanting to turn Queen's evidence and all that kind of stuff. That would have been like a nice serious message. But to be the body they dissected, did they not clean it up? Did it not? It's too many questions at that point. But up to that point, I thought it was excellent.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. I was really, really enjoying it. I thought it was well set up, well paced, an awful lot of fun stuff going on. But I got to the end of it and I was thinking, well, I must be thick. I've not followed this story. I've got to go through this again to find out what it is that I've missed. And then get to the end of it a second time and think, no, I'm definitely losing my fucking marbles here.
No, it's actually really good, but that ending just doesn't work. Now, it's not like Robert Louis Stevenson doesn't have a history with changing things from what his original intention was. And I think this reeks of it. I think it really reeks of something being tacked on or somebody else making a suggestion after it's been read. You know, it doesn't fit with the rest of the story. It's not like Charles Dickens with The Signal Man, where it was just like lots of really good descriptions, but bad characters. The characters are great in this. Everything is right about this for me, except the actual end itself. It's a bit, in a funny sort of way, it reminds me of the Mezzotint in that way. In the end of the Mezzotint, even though it's not as disconnected as this one is, it does seem to kind of go, we need to rush it on, or it seemed to be slightly not in connection with the rest of the story. But this one is chalk and cheese, I think.
So are you wanting to blame Mrs. Robert Louis Stevenson, since as we know that she tried to get him to burn, she allegedly got him to burn the manuscript for Jekyll and Hyde? She thought it was so horrific.
Maybe it was. Did she actually act as his editor? I think she did, didn't she?
I think so. Yeah. And although I think this one was published whilst he was alive, so I suppose ultimately he's taking the blame for it. Because I know she published some of his stuff after he died. And,
she did Yoko it a bit, didn't she?
Yeah. Wow, I can't believe you're saying Yoko in about Mrs. Louis Stevenson. But
it's a verb now. It's a verb now.
Oh no, Yoko, no.
I haven't looked into it that deeply because there's a lot because I've not read this one before, so a lot of this is really first time. And like you say, the first time you listen to it, you do get that. Did I miss something?
Yeah, but yeah, lots and lots of great gritty detail in there, and a lot of fun in the telling. Just it tripped up and it missed the goal at the last minute. Yeah, is that what you do with goals? Yes. Yeah.
Well, you can do.
Really, yeah.
Football metaphors are not really your thing.
They're not, are they? No. Burke and Hare.
Yeah, Burke and well, the thing is it Burke and Hare in this story? Does he name them as Burke and Hare? I can't remember now. That's the weird thing is I don't remember I don't actually remember them being named. The original Body.
I think he talks about Burke and Hare and says that people were crying out for Burke and Hare to be murdered and receive their punishment, but he doesn't actually refer to the grave robbers he's dealing with as Burke and Hare.
No, I think the Burke and Hare association with this particular story comes much later. There was a TV adaptation of it. Hang on a second, I can work computers. I mean, if I do that. If I do, there we go. It was Boris Karloff was in one. Toby Robinson, Toddy McFarlane. Where is it? I was only reading it not so long ago. Flesh and the Fiend. There you go. Yeah, 1960, where Peter Cushing plays Dr. Knox. The movie, The Flesh and the Fiends. It puts Dr. Knox in his association with Burke and Hare, and from what I can see, that's the first time they really put them together, rather than it being a side story. Because I think Burke and Hare were real people.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think what he's done is he's kind of been a bit meta, and so he's used this newspaper story of Burke and Hare to add to his world of the Body Snatchers, but they weren't actually Burke and Hare, whereas later on, when it gets adapted, it gets turned into Burke and Hare as part of the story.
And is Dr. Knox there spelt with a K?
Yes.
Because we've got sort of like K is the overarching character who has been paying things out for Burke and Hare. Well, for these characters.
Yeah.
But I would say that they are obviously a clear influence on the story, Burke and Hare. I would say that's partly. Who else? I was looking at a list of things of potential things. Deacon Brody. Are you familiar with the name?
Funny enough, Brody is an interesting name because Brody is the name of the sheriff in Jaws. Chief Brody.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
William Brody, often known by his title of Deacon Brody, Scottish cabinet maker, deacon of a trades guild and Edinburgh city councillor who maintained a secret life as a housebreaker, partly for the thrill and partly to fund his gambling.
Yes, I have heard of him.
And yeah, there is a suggestion that this guy could have been part of the inspiration for this story. Somebody who was doing this for the thrill, because I suppose one of the main themes within the story is peer pressure, isn't it?
Yes.
This whole notion that Fetis, the main character, is peer pressured into accepting McFarlane's ideas and McFarlane's. He accepts his ideas to create the alibi, doesn't he? That you've got to go through. Yes, we know there's a murder, and how are we going to make this look like we didn't know? I'm going to say I don't recognise her, and how do we do this? You complete the transaction.
because it was at the time the transaction, even though it was sordid, wasn't completely illegal historically. So they had to put it into the book to say, yes, they had purchased this body from their suppliers. And it was McFarlane was the driving force behind that.
Yeah, I think at some point he says he knows that all the bodies that they get are murdered.
Yes.
Which, is... which again, I think that's part of the cleverness of the writing. When he says all the bodies that we get are murdered, I didn't know whether he meant they have all been literally murdered by a murderer, or whether, God or time or fate has murdered each one of these that comes to us. So yeah, it was kind of clever writing in its ambiguity, that part, I thought.
Yeah. And I thought there was a lot of really clever writing in the way that he does things. Some of it is very of its time. I thought some of the way the phrasing was, you are obviously reading a Victorian ghost story. And actually, with the theme of this ghost story, that's right. I actually think it works and adds to the atmosphere in the way the language is used. Because let's face it, it's a time when surgeons didn't have scalpels; they had saws. They were still learning what was going on at the time, and the way that the language works really, again, it makes you an eavesdropper on the whole side of things, rather than just being, rather than someone who's taking part in it all. And I say is I love the way that he had this axe to grind with him, which I think was a really underdeveloped idea. You had a tiny little bit of the fact that Fett was annoyed with McFarlane because he made him, the peer pressure made him go along with it. But that never really, like you say, it never really concludes. It never becomes a particular event that he can never forgive him for.
Yeah, and I think it's that disconnect, as you said, between the story as we've got it set up and then and look, here's Gray's body, which doesn't sort of like suggest it's... we needed a moral twist or turn at the end of the story, something that would sort of like say, and this is why you shouldn't be dealing in a trade of dead bodies. And we didn't get that, because that just looks like, if they're all going to turn up looking like this bloke, well, being able to sell him once, you can sell him again. There's sort of like, that's not really a problem. So yeah, it needed some form of repercussion. We needed consequences there. Yeah. And if the consequences are just that, that somebody turns up with the surname Gray, wasn't enough. It wasn't enough in the conclusion.
No, it didn't have a lot of colour.
Nice. Yes, I like that. Yes.
But it is. It's almost like, part of it is this. I've got two schools of thought. One is he actually wrote the story and wrote 3 endings and just picked one at random. So he didn't really have a conclusion. He had a story that he had written himself into a cul-de-sac and wrote 3 endings, which was either done, nowadays it would be put on a vote on social media, wouldn't it? Which of these 3 endings do you think should be in the book? No spoilers. You can imagine that happening as a Twitter poll.
Yeah, definitely.
So maybe that happened. Or he was kind of doing that. They are 4 guys sat in a pub. The whole thing is being told as a story of sat in a pub. Now, the interesting thing is it never goes back to the pub at the end.
Yeah.
So you just have this kind of fireside reveal. Oh, and it was actually Gray all along. That kind of the jump scare that doesn't quite come off. So it's almost like he's written this one thing and couldn't quite decide how it was going to end. So one's the jump scare, one would be a more convoluted scare, or one just went on too long. Because remember, it was originally published in a magazine, wasn't it?
Yes,
it was originally published in
Pall Mall, 1884.
Yeah.
So you're thinking he might have sort of like trimmed the ending just for word count?
Yeah, in a way. What did he used to say? Cut below the line. Is it cut below the line?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if if what you're suggesting is how it was happening nowadays, it could even have been sort of like released as in a choose your own ending story. And stuff like, you read all of this, you get to the final couple of pages, and it's sort of like, do you want to go for option 1, 2, or 3? Yeah. You decide. Which I think might have been an interesting way of working it. But how would you have concluded it? If you've written this story, what would you have done to make the ending different and more satisfying for you as a reader?
I would have set up wouldn't have taken much setup. I'd have set up one of the body snatchers to wanting to turn because of Burke and Hare and people wanting blood for them, wanted them to they wanted them to hang for their their crimes. Yeah. So I would have had one of the body snatchers starting to waver and start to get cold feet and have that witnessed. So have the actual doctor trying to be blackmailed by the body snatcher, and then have the two others see this, and then actually no, I'd probably put it as McFarlane. McFarlane needs to do the deed, so I'd have him trying to blackmail McFarlane,
right.
And then when they go to dig up the body, McFarlane reveals that it's one of the body snatchers, so it's obvious that McFarlane's killed the person.
Right. Yes, so that would take away the supernatural element of it, then, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And it would mean that the horror comes from the realistic threat of dealing with criminals and getting involved in criminal activity.
But it would give him a reason to be really angry.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because he's actually perpetrated the crime, but has not been able to tell anyone about it because he knows that his life would be threatened.
Yeah, I think that would have been a far superior conclusion to. I mean, yeah, as we say, a well-written story, a well-crafted story that just sort of like jumps, screws the pooch at the end of it.
It's almost like when you're talking about trying to figure out where it came to the end. So it was either a multiple choice ending, or it's been suggested by someone. It might have been suggested by someone else, as in it needs to be a supernatural ending.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. In a way that when we read, Charlotte Riddle, the way it wasn't a supernatural ending, even though there were as an element, just tucked in the background. That maybe it was suggesting maybe he didn't have a supernatural ending, and then someone went, "No, you got to." This makes too much sense.
Robert Louis Stevenson, stick a ghost in there, yeah. I suppose if I'd have been working on this one, I would have wanted to go for something supernatural, and I would have wanted to have some sort of spooky thing occur within that story. And I don't know if I would have had the farmer's wife who was meant to be there give them a message, tell them how wrong they were to actually be stealing things, saying that that was wrong. I know that wouldn't tie into making Fetis have an issue with McFarlane, but at least it would have made sense that the body that they dug up was the one that they dug up.
Yes.
Which, I think that was the part where I was thinking, well, why is this happening? How is this happening?
See, I think your ending requires the beginning different. I think you need to not have the knowing each other. You need to have it as the event. And if you actually had it as the kind of event of they now turning their hands to it, they're the ones. So McFarlane is the one that's murdered the farmer's wife. Yes. That's what they're doing there. So they come to get the farmer's wife because he knows that the body's going to be fresh because he murdered it. They just got to let it be buried first. So you could bring it in that way, but then, like you say, is the farmer's wife could then come back to life and do the whole "you murdered me," and then you could bring that trope into it, couldn't you?
Or the first body that Fetis recognises is Judy Gilbraith. Is it Judy? Judith?
Judy.
Yeah, Judy is
Judy.
Judy's the first. If the farmer's wife's corpse had turned into Judy's corpse, and Judy had sort of like then turned round become animated and turned around to Fettis and McFarlane, turned around to Fettis and said, look, you're going to keep seeing me every time you mess around with a dead body because I was your gateway dead body drug into things. In that case, yeah, that would have made more sense.
Yeah, the guilt trick, because that would have been a guilt ghost then, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
That would work.
And she was his gateway into it, really.
Mm.
He sort of like, yeah, when he sort of like saw her and accepted the fact that, oh, well, I suppose it's money and yeah, best not stir things so that people have these, start asking awkward questions. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Because you could have actually had the whole person in the road scenario then as well, hurtling back to Edinburgh with the body on the back, and then suddenly you see someone in the front, like that, and then you've got to ditch you've got to pull the handbrake on the horses and get them to skid around. And then as you do that, you can have the body fall off, and that's what gets them caught because the police are there, and you can have that supernatural element as well, that they robbed the grave and it was the ghost of the woman that was the gateway that's caused them to crash, that caused them to get caught. And
I mean, I'm not having a go at Robert Louis Stevenson, and I did enjoy the story. It was just that one part which was out of kilter for me, and maddeningly, it was the final part. And it's just like, that's one of the reasons why you read a story, for that final part. You want to like the thrill of a happy ending.
It's not as frustrating as the Charles Dickens one, because the Charles Dickens one is frustrating because you have constant bloody hell moments all the way through. It's sort of like, oh, that's brilliant, oh bloody hell, oh, that's brilliant, oh you're doing that. Where this one is, it's not that at all. You are really getting this wonderful build up to something that feels like it's the wrong choice.
Yeah, it's that is so maddening. So we've got in it themes of human sin and greed, which I suppose
it's the most aggressive form of capitalism at that particular point, isn't it?
It is. We've got, as we said, peer pressure, constantly pressured in his job by others to do what he doesn't really want to do.
It's a bit. I'm going to bring in another. I don't know if this will be an influence. It might be a very subtle influence on the back of everything, and this is mainly because of what I'm reading at the moment for an essay that I'm writing. Is it kind of has a little bit of a Faustian agreement about it, in that it is a horrid, depraved act in the pursuit of knowledge.
Yes, I can fully see that. There are definitely Faustian aspects there, and I suppose with McFarlane and Fettis, we're sort of like seeing McFarlane as the successful Faust character who's taken on the deal and is benefiting from it, and we've got Fettis who's at the other end, who's looking haggard, who's looking crapulous. I'm going to be using that word so much more now. Who's looking crapulous because he's refused or recanted this whole deal.
Yeah. And don't forget, there's also the one above them. There's a whole doctor above those two that they're doing this for.
I mean, what I was actually getting from it when I was reading it were echoes of Herbert West Reanimator.
Yes, absolutely. Which is based on H.P. Lovecraft.
Yes, which I was just sort of like seeing those two as West and West's assistant. Who does he have a name?
Is it not so much his assistant? It was more his flatmate, isn't it?
Flatmate, lackey, house bitch.
Well, they reanimates his girlfriend's cat.
But we're going to have to go through those one one week, we're going to have to look at Herbert West. But I was getting, there was sort of like, I mean, they say that within comedy writing, you've got two stories. You've got sort of like the fish out of water story, and you've got the odd couple story. And I think what we've got there is an odd couple story with McFarlane and Fettis both being the opposite of each other.
Yes.
And there's that nice moment just before they go out to rob that final grave where it looks as though they're simpatico, as though they've got the same goals and ideals. And then it's sort of like with the uncovering of the body that they decide to go their separate ways because it's too much for either of them to take. But Fettis seems to handle it more poorly than Ant McFarlane, Wolf McFarlane, Deck McFarlane, Mr. McFarlane, Dr. McFarlane.
I'm trying to remember. Is it Todd McFarlane does the movie Maniacs?
There's a lot of these, yeah.
I just thought of that because he calls him Toddy, doesn't he? Toddy McFarlane. Todd McFarlane does the movie Maniacs. Yeah. He said looking around to see if I just had one to hand, and I don't. But basically, they're just the horror figures. Yes, I do. There you go. There's the Crow.
Oh.
And Todd McFarlane, it's McFarlane Toys. He also wrote Spawn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Be a bit more gentle with Brandon Lee there.
It's all right. I'll shoot him later.
Well, he just sounded like you were tossing him to one side. Yeah.
They have a special drawer. He's not just thrown to one side. They have my movie maniacs have special drawer. Yeah.
So yeah, I was getting, as I say, echoes of Herbert West there, and yeah, I suppose I've been looking at what could have potentially influenced him, and as we said, stuff like Burke and Hare, Deacon Brody. I've got here a situation. Oh, sorry, mate, go on.
Well, he was in Edinburgh, and that's where they used to have one of the public gallery dissection theatres. And I've actually been to the theatre where they used to do that in Edinburgh. They actually have the medical museum up there, and they have the actual theatre that they used to do. They used to perform post-mortems to paying public and who wanted to come along and learn such things. So I think he would have been heavily influenced by that whole scene.
Almost certainly, yeah. I think because it was a period where people were exploring the developments made by science and looking at these things in a frank and more honest way than ever before, then yeah, I think something like that certainly going to have is it fair to call it a ghoulish interest?
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, it's, nowadays you definitely call it a macabre, idea. But I don't know, was it ghoulish back then, or was it just pure curiosity?
I mean, we talk about sort of like the Victorians having Victorian freak shows for entertainment, but we say that as though it's a bad thing, which
gives people jobs.
It put people in jobs, and also it satisfied a curiosity. And we've got Victorian freak shows nowadays with things like Big Brother and Love Island and all these shows that we have on telly. My £600 Life, that one with the £1,000 sisters. There was a documentary a while back which was called The Man with the 10 Stone Balls, which annoyed me because, for one, he didn't have 10 of them, and they weren't made of stone. So yeah, that was false advertising. That, but
you're right. I mean, Benefit Street is also, they call it pornography, in that just watching people who are on that kind of on the breadline.
Poverty porn, isn't it? Yeah,
and it's the same. It's the same thing. I think with the freak show, and actually, in a funny sort of way, I felt the same when the first transvestite bars were opening up. It wasn't the entertainment. The entertainment's fine. The transvestite show is absolutely fantastic, and they're very, very talented people. And with RuPaul's Drag Race, we actually see how much of an entertainment it can be. But I remember going to Funny Girls in Blackpool when it first opened, and it wasn't the show, it was the people watching the show that made me feel uncomfortable, because the people watching the show came to see men in dresses, not to see an entertainment show.
Yes.
And I think that's what you're talking about, isn't it? If you have a public gallery for a post-mortem, were people going along to watch something ghoulish, or were they going along to watch something educational? Yeah.
And chances are you would have had a lot of ghouls sitting in that audience, people that were sort of like, wanting to watch something that was unpleasant, unseemly. Even
from the educational side of things, even if they were the other doctors, it wasn't just a learning thing. I think even for the doctors performing and teaching, there was a ghoulish drive behind part of it as well. There's that kind of power of God, because I think Frankenstein comes away from those kind of places as well, doesn't it? Mary Shelley was influenced by some of the bars that she drank in, and some of the people she knew from those circles.
And I mean, we can still see it in the 20th century. If you've watched, I'm going very lowbrow here, but if you watch something like The Man with Two Brains,
yes and no. Yes, it's very, very lowbrow. No, it's actually got a really high concept behind it. But yeah, the humour is very lowbrow.
But when he's sort of like there doing brain surgery for an audience of medical professionals,
yes.
It's something that's not that far removed from the reality that goes on. And it's meant to be for medical professionals only. But we know that if you've got a mate who's a doctor, in that case, bung him a bottle of scotch and sort of like say, can I go in there? I won't rub one out whilst I'm watching. It will just be sort of like safe for the bank. And it will be, it will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about where, I mean, we know that Robert Louis Stevenson obviously frequented bars in Edinburgh, because they do say, write about what you know. And as you pointed out earlier, they all seem to start off with 4 men in a bar. And so he was probably drinking in the establishments of the medical students as well. So, he was probably very attached to that, which I think actually shows within the story, and the idea that it's not trying to be over detailed. It's actually leaving huge amounts up to the idea of what's going on without it over explaining. It kind of just it doesn't explain exactly how the whole medical school works, or how the bodies are used in implicit detail, which I think shows this is not someone who's researched it. This is someone who just hangs around it. So they've got their own schemata that they are assuming their readers are going to have.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's I think I think it's fuck it. It's an okay story, but it just pissed me off that ending was not. It was like the final episode of Lost. You sort of like sat through 7 seasons of Lost, and you were thinking, well, this is great. The concept here, I don't know what's going on. I've heard all these rumblings around online that it's going to be this or it's going to be that. And then it's just, they're waiting to get on an airplane to go to heaven. And it's just, fuck off. Yeah, it was just,
But that happens so often, doesn't it? Like I say, there's a little bit of kind of like writing into a cul-de-sac. I mean, I will say, I will bet a pound to a penny that you've done this, where you've sat down to write a story. I've got one on the go at the moment, actually. I'm about halfway through it, and I've just hit a point where I can't quite decide what it needs to do. So it's now sat on one side waiting for either the inspiration or just basically, me to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go, that's it. That's how you do it. Or it might not get used for years. I've got stories that I brought back after 20, 30 years that I did that with 20, 30 years ago, and then suddenly go, I know how to make that work now because I've got these new characters that I can now weave that into. I wonder if it was one of those. I wonder if he'd actually written it, to a certain point and then just stopped and it was just in the file. And then they say Mozart used to do that, didn't they? Mozart actually once got paid to write a piece of music, and he just picked something up that he'd scribbled and sent it off and got paid for it because he was a bit of a pop star. And maybe he did that. Oh, this hasn't got an ending, so that's why the ending is so disjointed from the rest of it, because the rest of it was something that he was writing for a different purpose and then just stopped, and so it was just in the file somewhere.
Yeah, I'm going to go with that because I can't see any other excuse for it really. I've got also listed it as potential inspirations a gentleman called Major Weir, who lived in Edinburgh. That was from 1599 to 1670. Scottish soldier and presumed occultist, executed for bestiality, incest, and adultery. I'm not sure whether they're in sort of like ascending order or descending order. And yeah, he's remembered as Scotland's most notorious warlock. We've also got the haunted mausoleum of Sir George Mckenzie. That's in Greyfriars Kirkyard, which apparently is still haunted today as well. But again, although these are potential influences, I'm still thinking that Burke and Hare were probably the major influences.
Absolutely. The whole point of this story is, for me, is the two sides of it, is the peer pressure in order to get away with it, and the nefarious dealings that was the business of cadaver sales back in the Victorian times. And the most famous of those is Burke and Hare, and I think without a doubt in my mind that is the major influence. That's the whole point of why it was written. He was just basically describing the scenario that went on and then tried to create a narrative around it to create that kind of like, because what he's describing in all the body stuff, in all the taking of the bodies.
2 seconds, man. I've just got to take a quick phone call. Right.
And we're back.
Sorry about that. Yeah. We're back. Yes, we're back in the room. Yeah. Yeah, apparently with my ringtone going off there, I've got a thing up here saying that I need to set up professional audio in audio settings. I'm worried about copyright issues on my ringtone.
Well, we're living in that kind of world, but the capitalist world, which is what we were talking about in the influences here. And yeah, I mean, you've got all the other stuff, but I mean, spooky locations, I don't think. They're just inspirational anyway, aren't they? As a writer, I do it. I'm pretty certain I know you do it. We've had discussions about it. We collect spooky locations. You see them. I have some photographs on my phone from my last visit to Brighton, because we're walking down the street and I just happened to look up this set of stairs. And I was like, that is the spookiest house I've seen for a long time. So a couple of photographs of it so that I've got it for, ideas later on. So collecting spooky locations is something I think goes without saying. And in terms of inspiration, those characters would be there, but I don't really see anything in the characters here other than the realism of what it was. Like I say, I think he was creating more of a scene that was known to him with the medical profession, the background of the newspaper stories of Burke and Hare, and he's just created a drama in the middle of it. And all that side of it works brilliantly. That really, really works well for me. It's when it tries to get supernatural that it doesn't work.
Yeah. It just falls down so fucking flat, doesn't it? Yeah,
because it's the most uninspirational part of it. In a funny sort of way, isn't it? It's everything else is and it's not hyperrealism either, the way it's described, but it is just dripping with character and dripping with these wonderful emotional details that just make it so believable. It's just great. And then you just chuck that chuck on the end of it. It's just it's not the skills of the writer, without a doubt. We've read him before. When we did Jekyll and Hyde, there's no doubt at all that Robert Louis Stevenson is up there with one of the greatest writers of all time in being able to conjure up these images. And in this one, I think he is very successful for 98% of it.
Yep. Yeah, it's just annoying that 2% happens to be the 2%
that you want.
Yeah.
It's like having the best sex of your life with the worst orgasm.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. If I can remember what sex and orgasms are like. Yeah. Of course I can remember. I've got my search history here from yeah. Yes.
Hey, I can't even remember going to see Dracula at the Grand Theatre 3 years ago, but Facebook tells me I did.
That's scary, isn't it? So, next week.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, we're not picking. So your pick rolls over to the following week because we have a special guest next week. Mr. Ramsey Campbell, who enjoyed the H.P. Lovecraft, big fan of H.P. Lovecraft. So he wants us to return to the Lovecraft world, which we did say we were going to do. And he wants us to read the short story, The Rats in the Walls.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's certainly going to be. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Yeah, can't wait to see what you guys think to it. Please, if you've got this far, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the friend button, hit buttons. Yeah,
but don't kill anyone.
Kill someone, yeah, please, yeah. Blame it on us.
I was trying to do one of those after-school specials. Don't do drugs.
Well, he says don't do drugs, but apparently they're a lot of fun.
Yeah,
all the people I know who take drugs recommend them so highly. So yeah,
yeah, they get good reviews.
Yeah. I must check some out on Amazon.
Actually, no, go to drugs.com. I kid you not. It's actually it's great. Sorry, I have to do this one. If you want a resource, right? If you're doing medical orientated story, go to drugs.com. It's basically like Trustpilot for drugs. There's all these people that have been they've been prescribed drugs by the doctor, and they all go on and leave reviews. And I was reading the reviews of these antidepressants. So yeah, it's an interesting place to see. It's an interesting place to visit. Yeah.
Oh, brave new world.
Yeah, I try not to take the mick too much, because these people have been going through some really bad shit in their lives, but to go on and leave reviews of prescription drugs is an interesting mindset for me. So I thought, I'm definitely going to be paying that a bit more of a visit, because I think there's some really interesting characters in there.
Yeah, this sounds like right. I know what I'm doing this weekend.
You're doing drugs.com.
Yeah, screw Ramsey's story. Yeah, I'm on this machine. Yeah, and I'm checking out all my meds. So please hit like, hit subscribe, and if you've got friends, tell them. If you've not got friends, there's
tell random people. If you've not got friends, tell random people about this, and they'll become your friend.
Yeah, they will. Yeah. And in a squishy way as well.
Is that like a bus squishy?
No, in the sort of like
Oh, right. Gotcha.
squishy, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Like putting your head out the window of a car when it's windy.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
Fine. Yeah. Cool. All right then, mate.
All right. Thanks for that. See you later.
Bye.